Jack Harrington adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored navy suit, the polished silver catching the warm Hawaiian sunlight that spilled through the glass facade of the resort. At his side, Lily's laughter floated through the air, sharp and deliberate, the kind of laugh designed to be overheard. She wore a silk dress the color of champagne, its shimmer matched only by the diamond pendant resting against her collarbone. It wasn't subtle, but then again neither was she. Together they looked like the glossy advertisement of success, the ruthless businessman and the glamorous wife who had helped him forget the past. The resort lobby hummed with the quiet chatter of wealth. Executives in pressed linen suits, their wives in designer sandals, waiters balancing crystal glasses of chilled rose on silver trays. Jack inhaled deeply, savoring the salt of the Pacific carried on the breeze. This was his moment. In a few hours he would sign the deal that cemented his place at the top, a contract with the elusive Smith Clinton, the billionaire whose empire stretched from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. For Jack, this was not just business. This was a coronation. He felt Lily's manicured hand slide into his arm. "Imagine," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear, "what people will say after today. They'll finally see who you are, Jack. The man who wins." Jack's smile curved, thin and satisfied. He thought of Emily then, but only briefly. A ghost from another life. He remembered her small hands tending to potted plants in their suburban kitchen, her talk of starting a family, her constant hope. Lily had cut through that fantasy with the sharp edge of truth. Emily couldn't give him children. He was weak. Barren. He had raged at the thought, and Lily had been there to soothe him, to promise him more. To promise him everything. "Dead weight," he muttered under his breath, recalling Emily's tearful face the day he signed the divorce papers. He had traded fragility for fire, mediocrity for ambition. Now here he was at one of the world's most exclusive resorts, ready to claim everything that had always been meant for him. He straightened his tie as the glass doors opened, revealing the glittering pool deck beyond. Lily leaned closer, her diamond pendant catching the light. "This is it," she purred. "Your kingdom." Jack believed her. He believed every word. Jack had always loved resorts like this. The architecture was clean, white stone and glass, the kind that gleamed under the tropical sun. Wealth was in the air, subtle colognes, the rustle of expensive fabrics, the sharp clink of crystal glasses. For men like him, it wasn't just a vacation. It was a theater, a place where victories were flaunted and hierarchies carved in quiet glances. He moved through the lobby with Lily on his arm, her perfume trailing like a signature. Heads turned just as he knew they would. Lily preened under the attention, smoothing the silk at her hips, flashing her pendant at the right angles. Jack didn't mind. She was part of the image, part of the empire he had rebuilt after the wreckage of his marriage. He had traded up, and this room knew it. They were making their way toward the terrace where the first round of cocktails waited, when Jack's gaze snagged on something. Or rather, someone. At first he thought it was a trick of the light. A figure near the reception desk, speaking quietly to a bellboy, her posture unassuming. She wore jeans, simple sandals, and a linen blouse that looked almost too plain for this glittering resort. No diamonds. No designer bag dangling from her wrist. She could have been mistaken for a tourist who had wandered into the wrong hotel. But Jack's stomach tightened anyway. Emily. His first thought was disbelief. His second was scorn. Of all places, she had to be here. Here where the most important deal of his career was about to unfold. Here in the cathedral of his triumph. And she looked exactly as he expected, ordinary. Forgettable. She hadn't changed at all. He slowed his pace, eyes fixed on her as though he were studying a ghost that refused to stay buried. "Jack." Lily's voice was sharp, tugging at his sleeve. "What is it?" His mouth twisted into a smirk. Well. Speak of the devil." Lily followed his gaze, squinting. When her eyes landed on Emily, her lips curled in disdain. Her. Yes. Her. For a moment they both stood still, watching Emily thank the bellboy with a small smile before gathering her tote bag. She looked thinner maybe, but not worn. Not broken in the way he had once imagined she'd be. Yet her simplicity infuriated him more than any display of bitterness could have. "She looks," Lily tilted her head, searching for the right word. "Lost. Like she doesn't belong." Jack gave a low chuckle. "Exactly. Same old Emily. Still scraping by, still out of her depth." He adjusted his cufflinks as though to remind himself of the gulf that now existed between them. She probably saved for a year just to stay one night here. The thought gave him a mean satisfaction. He remembered the day he walked out, the tears streaking down her face as she begged him to reconsider. Lilly had been waiting just outside, whispering to him about wasted time, about Emily's failures, about children she would never give him. The word barren still echoed in his mind like a gavel strike. It had been the final verdict on their marriage. And now here she was, proof of everything he had told himself since. She was still small, still insignificant. Lily's nails dug lightly into his arm. "We should say hello," she said sweetly, though her eyes gleamed with something sharper. "Remind her how far you've come." Jack considered it, savoring the image. Emily, forced to look at him, forced to see what he had become without her. Wealthy, powerful, standing beside a woman who was everything she wasn't. A woman who knew how to play the game. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low, deliberate. "Let her see." But Emily didn't notice them. She crossed the lobby, her tote slung over her shoulder, and stepped out toward the garden path that curved around the resort. Her pace was steady, her head slightly bowed as though she were perfectly at ease in her solitude. The sight gnawed at Jack. She should have looked miserable. She should have looked broken. Glad she looked calm. He scowled, shaking off the thought. Calm wasn't triumph. Calm wasn't power. It was nothing. Still, as he let Lilly tug him toward the terrace, his mind refused to quiet. Memories stirred, unwelcome and jagged. Emily kneeling in their garden, dirt under her fingernails, laughing about the tomatoes that never grew straight. Emily setting the table for dinner, her hands moving with practiced care. Emily whispering about baby names in the dark, her voice threaded with fragile hope. He had called those things small, provincial. He had called her weak. He had believed it. But why then did the sight of her standing alone in this glittering palace unsettle him so deeply? "Don't waste another thought on her," Lilly hissed as though reading his mind. She leaned close, her voice dripping venom. "She's nothing, Jack. Always was, always will be." Jack exhaled slowly, his smile returning like armor. "You're right," he said. "She's a ghost. And I don't chase ghosts." But even as the words left his mouth, his eyes flicked once more toward the glass doors, where Emily had vanished into the garden. A ghost, yes. But one that refused to stay buried. The terrace was alive with conversation, the kind of carefully measured chatter that only money could cultivate. Waiters wove between tables balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, their movements precise, invisible as though the entire evening were choreographed. Jack and Lilly entered the current with ease, their smiles polished, their gestures rehearsed. But beneath Jack's composed exterior, a quiet irritation gnawed at him. The image of Emily standing at the reception desk, her calmness, her steady eyes, it lingered unwelcome like a splinter lodged too deep. He had dismissed her, yes. Called her a ghost. And yet she had unsettled him in a way that no rival CO, no hostile takeover, ever had. Lilly, sensing the shift in his mood, tightened her grip on his arm. "Forget her," she whispered, her lips curving into a smile meant for their audience, not for him. "Tonight is yours, Jack. Don't give her space in your head." He nodded, forcing a chuckle, though his eyes betrayed him. They kept scanning the terrace. And inevitably they found her. Emily was seated near the edge of the gathering, at a modest table draped in white linen. The lantern light touched her face, softening the sharpness of memory, illuminating features he had long convinced himself were plain. She wasn't wearing silk or sequins, but the simplicity of her navy dress carried an elegance that unsettled him more than Lily's glittering pendant ever could. She wasn't trying to belong here, she simply did. That was intolerable. Jack's jaw flexed. "Let's say hello," he said, his voice tight, deliberate. Lily's smile sharpened. She relished these moments, the chance to prove herself not just as his partner but as his accomplice. Perfect idea. They approached her table with the slow confidence of predators. Conversations around them softened, attention tilting in their direction. Jack fed on it, letting the eyes of the room validate every step. He wanted them all to see. Emily looked up as they arrived, her expression composed, unreadable. "Jack," she said evenly, inclining her head. "Lilly." Her calmness infuriated him. Not a flicker of shock, not a tremor of nerves. It was as though their arrival meant nothing. Jack leaned against the table, his smirk spreading. Emily. What are the odds? I wouldn't have expected to see you here of all places. His tone dripped with mock surprise. Quite an expensive resort. Did you win a raffle? Lily laughed, the sound brittle and deliberate. Or perhaps a sympathy discount. They must keep a few rooms aside for charity cases. Emily didn't rise to the bait. She simply placed her napkin on her lap, her hands steady. I'm here with family, she said, her voice calm. Family. The word pricked him unexpectedly. Jack's smirk deepened, masking the irritation. Family, he repeated as though tasting the word. Interesting choice. Considering, well, he let the sentence trail off, heavy with implication. Lily leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in satisfaction. Yes, considering everything you never could give him. Jack felt the old anger flare, the years of bitterness at her so-called failure. He picked up the glass of red wine resting at the edge of her table, swirling it lazily. Do you still tell yourself stories at night, Emily? He asked, his voice low, mocking. Stories about the life you thought you'd have? About the children that never came? A hush had settled around them. Guests at nearby tables were no longer pretending not to listen. The waiters slowed in their movements, their trays balanced a little too carefully. Emily met his gaze, steady and unflinching. I don't dwell on the past, Jack, she said simply. Her calm was unbearable. It stripped his words of their poison, left him standing exposed. So he tipped the glass. The crimson liquid splashed across her dress, blooming into dark stains that spread down the fabric like an open wound. Gasps erupted around them, forks clattered against porcelain. Lily's laugh rang out again, higher this time but thinner, more forced. Oh, Emily, she cooed, her tone dripping with false pity. Still so meek. Always letting life happen to you. Some things never change. Jack leaned back, smirking as though he had won, as though this act of cruelty had finally re-established the hierarchy. He spread his arms slightly, inviting the crowd to witness. He wanted to say, look at the woman I left behind. Look at what I traded up from. But the silence that followed was not admiration. It was judgment. Emily dabbed at her dress with her napkin, her movements calm, almost graceful. She didn't lash out. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, composed, as though their cruelty were nothing more than noise carried on the breeze. Her dignity was louder than any defense could have been. Jack felt it then, a prickle at the edges of his certainty. The room was not with him. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, not impressed but appalled. He could feel whispers gathering like a tide just beyond earshot. Emily finally looked up, her eyes locking with his. There was no hatred in them. No bitterness. Just quiet recognition and something worse. A certainty that she no longer saw him as anything at all. Jack's smirk faltered. Lily, sensing the shift, tugged at his arm. Come on, she hissed, her voice urgent. She's not worth another second. They turned, moving back toward the center of the terrace. Jack grabbed a fresh glass of champagne, his hand trembling slightly, his jaw clenched too tight. He raised it high, forcing a grin. To victories, he declared, his voice louder than necessary. The guests murmured polite agreement, but their eyes lingered on the woman at the edge of the terrace in her wine-stained dress, still seated, still composed. And in that moment Jack felt it, the tiniest crack in the illusion he had built around himself. The terrace was still humming faintly with discomfort after Jack's cruel performance. Conversations had resumed, but thinner, strained, like music played just off-key. Jack pretended not to notice. He laughed too loudly at a passing remark, lifted his glass too high, and performed the role of the conquering man with just a little too much force. But his eyes strayed. Always they strayed back to Emily. She sat quietly at her table, her dress stained but her posture straight, her expression composed. The wine hadn't broken her. Nothing had. And that, somehow, made the silence around her louder than the chatter filling the rest of the terrace. Jack drained his champagne and reached for another. He needed to anchor himself. Tonight wasn't about her. Tonight was about the deal, about the moment he had been building toward for years. Smith Clinton would arrive, they would sign, and Emily would fade back into the irrelevance where she belonged. And then the doors at the far end of the terrace opened. A hush fell. It wasn't deliberate, not coordinated, but instinctive, as though the room itself knew to pause. Waiters slowed mid-step. Guests leaned back in their chairs. Heads turned. Smith Clinton had arrived. He was taller than Jack expected, broad-shouldered, his silvering hair cut cleanly, his suit a quiet, immaculate gray. He didn't radiate the brashness of new wealth but the gravity of old power, the kind that required no performance. He walked with unhurried confidence as though every inch of the terrace belonged to him already. But it wasn't Smith alone who stole the air from the room. Beside him a little boy trotted along holding tightly to his hand. No more than 2, maybe 3. A boy with dark curls and bright, curious eyes. Jack's chest tightened. His grip on the glass slipped, almost spilling. And then he watched the boy's face light up, saw his legs pump faster as he let go of Smith's hand and ran across the terrace. "Mommy," the child squealed, his small voice carrying across the stunned silence. Emily rose from her chair, her arms open, her smile radiant as she lifted the boy into her embrace. The world stopped. Jack felt the ground tilt beneath him. His breath hitched, shallow and ragged. It wasn't possible. But it was. The child buried his face against Emily's shoulder, laughing, while Smith crossed the terrace in steady, measured strides, his eyes locked not on the crowd, not on the deal, but on her. On Emily. When he reached her side, he bent slightly, kissed her cheek, and rested a hand on her back with the easy intimacy of a man entirely at home. Husband. Protector. Partner. And in that instant, every lie Jack had ever told himself collapsed. The infertility. The barren excuse that had driven him to rage. The poison Lilly had whispered into his ear until it became truth. All of it unraveled in a heartbeat. Emily hadn't been broken. She hadn't been incapable. She had simply been free. Free of him, free to build a life that no longer needed him. And worse, she had built it with the man Jack needed most. The terrace was alive again now, but with whispers, sharp and urgent, bouncing from table to table. Jack could feel the stares on his back, the judgment thick in the humid air. His humiliation was no longer private. It was spectacle. Beside him, Lily's fingers dug into his arm, her grip icy, her face frozen in a mask of disbelief. For once she had no venom, no words. Smith turned then, his gaze sweeping across the terrace until it landed squarely on Jack. The weight of it hit like a hammer blow. Jack tried to hold his posture, to smirk, to summon some shred of arrogance. But the billionaire's eyes pinned him in place, cold and unwavering. The boy's laughter rang out across the terrace as Smith lifted him high, his curls glowing in the lantern light. Guests smiled softly at the sight, until Smith's gaze drifted back to Emily. His expression shifted, sharp and uneasy. "Emily," he said quietly, touching the damp stain on her blouse, the crimson fabric clinging to her skin. "What happened here?" Emily hesitated, her lips parting. But before she could speak, a waiter nearby stepped forward, his hands shaking as he set down a tray. His voice cracked, but it carried across the hush of the crowd. "Sir, it was him. That man threw wine on her." Everyone saw it. All eyes swung to Jack. The air grew heavy, charged with judgment. Jack's smug mask faltered. Emily drew in a steady breath, then met her husband's eyes. "He is my ex-husband." It was just a sentence, simple and bare. Yet it fell like a hammer, reverberating through every corner of the terrace. Smith froze. For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, and then fury lit his face. With deliberate calm, he reached for the folder on the table, the contract Jack had been parading like a crown jewel. He lifted it high enough for everyone to see. Then, with a single violent motion, he tore it straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper cracked like thunder. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by a rising swell of whispers. Jack lurched forward, his voice breaking. "Mr. Clinton, wait. This deal. This is a misunderstanding." But Smith's voice boomed over him, each word laced with ice. "I don't sign deals with men who disgrace women. Least of all my wife." The word struck Jack like a blade. Wife. It wasn't just humiliation. It was annihilation. The deal he had built his future upon lay shredded at his feet, and the room that once looked at him with respect now looked at him with disgust. Emily laid a gentle hand on Smith's arm, her eyes soft but resolute. "That's enough," she whispered. "You've done more than I ever could." Smith's jaw stayed tense, but he bent his head, brushing a kiss against her temple. "For you always." And with that he drew Emily close, their son's laughter breaking the silence that followed. Together they turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing among the ruins of his pride. He wanted to shout, to claw the moment back, to prove he still mattered. But no sound came. The only thing left to him were the whispers, sharp, merciless, unforgettable. Jack had mocked her, humiliated her, dismissed her as nothing. But now the truth was plain for all to see. She had a husband who cherished her. A son she was told she could never have. A life more radiant than anything Jack could have imagined. And Jack? He was left with ashes. Emily didn't need revenge. Her happiness became the justice. If Emily's story moved you, if you found yourself cheering for her quiet triumph, make sure you subscribe for more stories just like this. Hit like if her strength inspired you and share this video with someone who needs the reminder. Betrayal never writes the final chapter. Life always does.